The November rain fell like cold needles against the windows of the small wooden house on Maple Street. Inside, Martha Hayes sat in her late husband's armchair, the one with the worn leather arms where George used to read his engineering manuals every
Lord, we
evening for
thank you
40
for this
years.
food and for the
She
safe
held his
return
pocket
of our
watch in her
family.
weathered hands.
Amen.
The gold
That
had
looks great.
faded to a dull
This
brass
is
color, but she
incredible!
could still
Isn't
read
it?
the
Hold
inscription on the back,
The
"To
view is
George with all my love,
breathtaking.
Just
Martha,
wait.
1975. 5 years. 5 years since the cancer took him. 5 years since she'd heard his voice say her name. The house creaked around her. Not the comfortable creaks of a home settling for the night, but the groans of a structure giving up. The roof leaked in 3 places. The furnace coughed and wheezed like an old man with pneumonia. The windows no longer closed properly, letting in the Montana winter through every crack and gap. Martha looked at the envelope on the side table. Millbrook Community Bank. Final notice. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes, but she knew what they said. She'd read the letter 17 times. $4,200. Due in 10 days, or the house would be taken. The house George built with his own hands in 1982. The house where they raised Danny. The house where George died, holding her hand, telling her he loved her one last time. She couldn't lose it, but she had no way to save it. Martha opened her worn leather purse and counted the money inside. 3 $5 bills, 47 cents in change, $15.47. That was everything until her Social Security check arrived in 12 days, 2 days too late. Her hands trembled as she put the money back. The tremor wasn't just from age. Her blood sugar was dropping. She knew the signs, the dizziness, the cold sweat, the confusion that crept in at the edges of her mind. She needed her insulin. But the prescription bottle in the bathroom cabinet had been empty for 6 days. The pharmacy wanted $140 for a refill. She'd called them twice, asked if there was any way to pay in installments. The young man on the phone had been polite but firm. No insurance, no credit, no medication. So she rationed what little she had left. Then she ran out entirely. Tomorrow, she told herself, tomorrow she'd figure something out. She always did. Martha pushed herself up from George's chair and walked to the kitchen. Her footsteps echoed in the empty house. Once this kitchen had been filled with noise and life. Danny doing his homework at the table. George fixing the cabinets he'd built himself. The radio playing country music while Martha prepared Sunday dinner for the whole family. Now it was just silence. And cold. She opened the refrigerator. The light inside flickered, struggling. Half a loaf of bread, 6 eggs, a small container of butter. A carton of milk that would expire tomorrow. That was all. The freezer held 1 package of bacon she'd been saving. For what she didn't know. Some special occasion that never seemed to come. Martha closed the refrigerator and walked to the window above the sink. Outside, the rain continued to fall. The weather forecast said it would turn to snow by midnight. The first real winter storm of the season. She looked at the thermometer mounted outside the window. 34 degrees, just above freezing, but dropping fast. A movement caught her eye. Headlights coming down Maple Street. But these weren't normal headlights. They were low to the ground, cutting through the rain like angry eyes. The sound reached her a moment later. The deep, throaty rumble of motorcycle engines. Not the high-pitched whine of sport bikes, but the bass thunder of big cruisers. Harley-Davidsons, if she had to guess. George used to love Harleys, though they'd never been able to afford one. Martha stepped back from the window. The motorcycles were slowing down. Right in front of her house. Her heart began to pound. She'd seen the news. She knew about motorcycle gangs. The violence, the drugs, the crime. The engines cut off one by one until there was only the sound of rain drumming on metal and leather. Through the rain-streaked window, Martha counted 5 motorcycles. 5 large men in black leather jackets, standing in her driveway, rain pouring down on them. She should call the police, but her hand didn't reach for the phone. Instead, she watched. The men weren't moving. They stood beside their bikes' helmets, off now, looking at each other. One of them, the tallest one, pointed at something. Martha followed his gesture. The bikes. One of them was tilted at an odd angle. Something was wrong. The tall man knelt down, and even from inside the house, Martha could see his shoulders slump in frustration. He stood up, pulled out a cell phone, looked at it, then held it up toward the sky. No signal. The storm must have knocked out the cell towers again. It happened every time there was heavy weather in Millbrook. The men gathered together, clearly discussing something. Their body language spoke of exhaustion and frustration. They'd been riding for a long time. They were soaked, they were cold, and they were stuck. Martha's hand went to the cross hanging around her neck. It had been her mother's. She remembered what her mother used to say. We don't turn away those in need, Martha. Even when we have nothing to give, we give what we can. But these were strangers. Large, rough-looking men covered in tattoos and leather. The kind of men the news warned you about. Yet something in Martha's heart whispered differently. She thought of George. What would he do, George, who'd served his country? George, who'd worked 40 years fixing engines at the Ford plant. George, who'd never met a stranger he wouldn't help if he could. She remembered a story George told her once. During the Gulf War, when his unit's plane had mechanical trouble in the desert, a local farmer had given them water and shade, even though he had almost nothing himself. George said that farmer saved their lives. A man isn't defined by what he wears, George had said. He's defined by what he does when no one's watching. Martha took a deep breath. Her hands were still shaking, but now it was from determination, not fear. She walked to the front door and opened it. The cold rain hit her face immediately. The 5 men turned to look at her, surprise evident on their hard faces. You boys look cold, Martha called out, her voice steady despite her racing heart. And wet, can I help you? The tall man stepped forward. Up close, Martha could see he was perhaps in his mid-50s with a weathered face that spoke of years in the sun and wind. A long scar ran down his left cheek. His eyes, though, were kind, tired and frustrated, but kind. Ma'am, he said, his voice rough but respectful. We don't want to bother you. Our bike broke down. We were trying to call for help, but there's no signal. Nothing's going to be open anyway, Martha said. Not at this hour. Not in this storm. Joe's garage closes at 6 and Pete's auto shop has been closed for 3 years now. The man nodded slowly. We'll figure something out. We're sorry to disturb you. He started to turn away, but Martha heard herself speak before she could stop. When's the last time you boys ate? The men looked at each other. The tall one turned back. This morning, ma'am. We left Boise at dawn, trying to make it to Billings before dark. Martha did the math in her head. Boise, Idaho to Millbrook, Montana. That was at least 8 hours of riding. In the cold, in the rain, without food. She thought of the $15.47 in her purse. She thought of the eggs and bread in her refrigerator. She thought of the bacon in the freezer. She thought of George. Come inside, Martha said. The tall man shook his head. Ma'am, we couldn't. You can and you will, Martha said, her voice taking on the firm tone she'd used for 30 years as an elementary school teacher. I will not have 5 men standing cold and hungry in front of my house. George wouldn't allow it, and neither will I. George, one of the other men, asked a younger one with kind eyes and hands that trembled slightly. My late husband, Martha said. He always said that kindness doesn't cost money, but it's worth more than gold. Now come in before you all catch pneumonia. She turned and walked back into the house, leaving the door open behind her. For a moment, she heard nothing but the rain, then footsteps on the porch. They were coming in. Martha's heart pounded as the 5 men filed into her small living room, dripping water onto the hardwood floor George had laid himself. They looked enormous in the confined space, these leather-clad strangers with their tattoos and their weathered faces. Don't worry about the water, Martha said, seeing one of them trying to step carefully. This floor has seen worse. George once brought a muddy deer through here during hunting season. The men chuckled and some of the tension left the room. I'm Jake Morrison, the tall man said, extending his hand. This is Maria Chen, Tommy O'Brien, Carlos Mendoza, and Ray Williams. Martha shook each of their hands in turn. Jake's grip was firm but gentle. Maria, the only woman in the group, had the strong, capable hands of someone who worked with them. Tommy's hand trembled in hers, and she noticed the slight palsy in his movements. Carlos barely spoke, just nodded. Ray had the deepest, gentlest voice she'd ever heard. Martha Hayes, she said, please sit down. I'll make some coffee and see about getting you all fed. Ma'am, you don't have to. Jake started, but Martha held up her hand. I know I don't have to. I want to. Now sit. They sat. Martha went to the kitchen and put on a pot of coffee. While it brewed, she opened her purse and looked at the $15.47 again. She thought about the insulin she couldn't afford. She thought about the house payment she couldn't make. She thought about the empty refrigerator and the unpaid bills stacked on the counter. Then she thought about 5 people cold and hungry and stranded. The decision took less than a heartbeat. Martha put on her coat and grabbed her car keys. I'll be right back, she called to the living room. Make yourselves comfortable. Where are you going? Maria asked, concern in her voice. To the store. I need a few things. Before anyone could protest, Martha was out the door and in her old Ford pickup, the one George had bought in 1998 and kept running through sheer force of will and duct tape. The Millbrook Quick Mart was the only store still open. Susan Miller, who'd gone to high school with Martha 40 years ago, was behind the counter. "Martha Hayes out in this weather," Susan said. "Everything okay?" "Just fine, Susan. I have some guests. Need to feed them." Martha walked the aisles, quickly calculating prices in her head. 2 pounds of ground beef, $5.99. A package of spaghetti, $1.49. A jar of marinara sauce, $2.99. Onions, garlic, a small bag of shredded cheese. At the register, the total came to $15.43. Martha handed Susan the three $5 bills and the 47 cents in change. "Keep the change," Martha said, her hands shaking as she picked up the bag. Susan looked at her oddly. "Martha, are you sure you're—" "I'm fine, Susan. Have a good night." Martha drove home through the rain, the grocery bag on the seat beside her. She just spent every cent she had in the world. She should feel terrified, panicked, desperate. Instead, she felt calm. When she returned, the men were looking at the photographs on her walls. Jake stood in front of a picture of George in his work uniform at the Ford plant. "Your husband worked at Ford?" Jake asked. 40 years, Martha said, setting the grocery bag on the kitchen counter. "Started as a line worker, ended as a senior mechanic. He could fix anything with an engine." "What did he work on?" Tommy asked, and Martha noticed his hands were steadier now, warmed by the house. "Everything. Cars, trucks, farm equipment. But his specialty was aircraft engines. He learned that in the military during the Cold War, served in Germany working on fighter jets." Jake went very still. "Aircraft engines." "That's right. He was proud of that work. Said he helped keep pilots safe." Martha started unpacking the groceries. "Now let me get you all fed." She worked in the kitchen with practiced efficiency. The ground beef went into her largest skillet, browning with onions and garlic. The spaghetti went into a pot of boiling water. The marinara sauce heated in a saucepan. While the food cooked, Martha pulled out the bacon from the freezer and made French toast from the bread, eggs, and milk. It wasn't fancy, but George had always loved her French toast. The smell of cooking food filled the small house. Martha heard one of the men, Carlos, she thought, whisper, "Dios mío, when's the last time I smelled home cooking?" 45 minutes later, Martha set the dining room table with her good china, the set she and George had gotten as a wedding gift 50 years ago. She hadn't used these plates since George died. "Dinner's ready," she called. The 5 bikers came into the dining room and stopped. They stared at the table, the white tablecloth, the china plates, the steaming platters of spaghetti and French toast, the coffee in George's good carafe. Maria put her hand to her mouth. Jake's eyes glistened. "Ma'am," Tommy said, his voice breaking, "you didn't have to do all this." "I know," Martha said simply, "but you're in my house, and in my house guests are fed properly. Now sit down before it gets cold." They sat. These 5 rough-weathered bikers sat at Martha's table like children called to Sunday dinner. Martha bowed her head. "Lord, thank you for this food, for this shelter, and for these strangers who are becoming friends. Keep them safe on their journey. Amen." "Amen," Ray echoed, his deep voice reverent. They ate. Martha watched them, these 5 souls who'd stumbled into her life on a rainy November night. Jake ate slowly, savoring every bite, his eyes closed, as if committing the taste to memory. Maria wiped tears from her eyes as she ate the French toast, whispering, "Just like my grandmother used to make." Tommy's hands shook as he lifted his fork, but Jake quietly steadied his plate without a word, a gesture so automatic it spoke of long friendship. Carlos, the quiet one, ate in silence, but Martha saw him mouth the words "gracias" more than once. Ray closed his eyes before each bite, and Martha realized he was praying. Not just once at the beginning, but continuously, thankfully, with each mouthful. "This is incredible," Jake said finally. "Ma'am, I haven't had a meal like this in, I can't remember how long." "Where are you all headed?" Martha asked. "You said Billings." "Yes, ma'am," Jake replied. "We're part of an organization called Rolling Thunder Veterans MC. We're riding from Boise to Billings to raise money for St. Mary's Children's Hospital." "Veterans," Martha said. "You all served—" "Most of us," Jake said. "I was Air Force during the Gulf War, aircraft engineer. Maria was Army, served as a medic in Iraq. Ray was Navy chaplain. Carlos and Tommy didn't serve military, but they serve the community now." Tommy spoke up, his voice soft. "My son is at St. Mary's, Jason. He's 8 years old. He has leukemia." The word hung in the air like a weight. "I'm so sorry," Martha said quietly. "We're trying to raise money," Tommy continued, and now Martha could see the exhaustion in his eyes, deeper than any physical tiredness. "For families like mine, the medical bills, they're crushing. We want to help." Martha reached across the table and took Tommy's trembling hand in hers. Your boy is going to fight, and you're going to fight with him. I'll pray for Jason every night." Tommy's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, ma'am." After dinner, the men insisted on washing dishes. Martha tried to protest, but Maria took her gently by the shoulders and sat her down in George's chair. "You've done enough," Maria said. "Let us do this." From the living room, Martha listened to the sounds of running water and quiet conversation in her kitchen. These strangers washing her dishes, using her dish towels, putting away her plates in the cabinets. It should have felt invasive. Instead, it felt like family. When they finished, Jake came into the living room. "Ma'am, we can't thank you enough. You've given us more than food. You've given us hope. We'll sleep out in the garage if that's okay. Fix the bike in the morning and be out of your way." "The garage isn't heated," Martha said. "You'll freeze." "We've slept in worse places," Jake said with a small smile. "I have sleeping bags," Tommy offered. "We'll be fine." Martha wanted to argue, but her head was swimming. The room tilted slightly. She gripped the arms of the chair. "Ma'am," Maria was beside her in an instant, fingers on Martha's wrist, checking her pulse. "When did you last eat?" This morning I had some toast. And your medication, I saw you trembling earlier." Martha didn't answer. She didn't have to. Maria's face went pale. "You're diabetic. When did you last take your insulin?" 6 days ago." The room went silent. 6 days? Maria's voice was sharp with medical concern. "Ma'am, that's incredibly dangerous. Where's your medication?" I ran out. I couldn't afford the refill." Maria looked at Jake. Something passed between them, an entire conversation in a single glance. "The food tonight," Jake said slowly. "How much did that cost?" Martha tried to wave the question away, but Jake knelt down beside the chair, his scarred face level with hers. "How much, ma'am?" $15.43, Martha whispered. "And how much money did you have before you went to the store?" Martha didn't answer. She couldn't. Carlos had gone to the kitchen. He came back with something in his hand, the receipt from the Quick Mart retrieved from the trash bag Martha had left on the counter. "Total $15.43, Carlos read aloud. "Paid $15.47. Change 4 cents. The silence that followed was deafening. "You spent your last $15, Jake said, and it wasn't a question. "Everything you had, to feed us." "You were hungry," Martha said simply. "What else was I supposed to do?" Maria's eyes were shining with tears. "Let me check your blood sugar." "I don't have test strips either," Martha admitted. "They were too expensive." Maria pulled out a small kit from her jacket pocket. She always carried medical supplies and tested Martha's blood sugar. Her face went white. "It's dangerously low. You need to eat something, now." "There's still some spaghetti left," Martha said. "You didn't eat any," Ray observed. "We ate everything. You cooked for us, but you didn't cook for yourself." The truth of it settled over the room. Tommy stood abruptly and walked to the window, his hands clenched into fists. Jake's jaw was tight. Carlos had his head bowed. Ray pulled out a small Bible from his jacket and held it, saying nothing. Maria went to the kitchen and came back with what little food remained, some cheese, the last of the bread. She made Martha eat while the men stood around these hardened bikers, watching this elderly woman who'd given everything to help them. "Ma'am," Jake said finally, his voice rough with emotion, "why did you help us? You didn't know us. We could have been anyone." Martha thought about the question. She thought about George, about her mother, about the life she'd lived and the values she'd been raised with. "My mother used to tell me something," Martha said. "She said, don't forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some have entertained angels without knowing it." That's from the Bible. Hebrews, I think. "Hebrews 13:2, Ray confirmed quietly. "I don't know if you're angels," Martha continued with a small smile, "but you're human beings, cold and hungry and in need. That's enough." Jake stood and walked to the window. His shoulders were shaking. When he turned back, tears were running down his scarred face. "Ma'am, there is something you should know. Something about your husband." Martha's heart skipped. "George? What about him?" Jake pulled out his wallet and extracted a worn photograph. He handed it to Martha. The photo was old, the colors faded. It showed 4 young men in military flight suits standing in front of an F-15 fighter jet. The desert stretched behind them, endless and hostile. Martha's breath caught. The second man from the left was George. Younger, his hair dark instead of gray, but unmistakably George. "That's George," she whispered. "But when was this taken?" He never mentioned. "March 1991, Jake said. "Saudi Arabia, during the Gulf War." Martha looked at the other faces in the photo. And then she saw it. The first man from the left. Younger, no scar yet, but the same kind eyes. "That's you," she said. "You knew George. He saved my life," Jake said, his voice breaking. "We were on a mission. Our plane developed mechanical problems over the desert, catastrophic engine failure. We crash-landed 50 miles from base. George was the engineer on our support team. He drove out into the desert in the middle of a sandstorm with hostiles in the area. He worked on that engine for 6 hours straight, under fire until he got it running well enough to limp back to base." Jake pointed to the other faces in the photo. "That's Tommy O'Brien. He was one of the pilots. George saved him too." Martha's hands trembled as she looked at Tommy. "You were there." Tommy nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I was 19 years old. It was my first combat mission. When the engine failed, I thought I was going to die in that desert. Your husband wouldn't let that happen. He stayed with us, protected us, fixed that plane with his bare hands. He saved all four of us." "I never knew," Martha whispered. "George never told me. He just said he worked on planes. He never said—" "He was a hero," Jake said. "One of the bravest men I ever met. After the war, I looked for him. I wanted to thank him properly. But I couldn't find him. He just disappeared into civilian life. And then tonight, I saw his picture on your wall, and I knew, the man who saved my life. I'd found him at last." He paused, his voice thick with grief. "But I'm 30 years too late." Martha looked at George's photograph on the wall. Her husband, her kind, quiet husband, who fixed cars and built birdhouses and never mentioned that he'd saved lives in a war zone. "He would have been embarrassed," Martha said with a tearful laugh. "George never liked to talk about himself. He just did what needed to be done." "Like you," Maria said softly. "You just did what needed to be done. You gave us everything you had." "And we're going to repay that," Jake said, determination hardening his voice. "All of you come with me." He led the other bikers out onto the porch. Through the window, Martha watched them huddle together, talking urgently. Cell phones came out. The signal must have returned. Jake was making calls. Lots of calls. 20 minutes later, he came back inside. "Ma'am, we need to leave for a few hours, but we'll be back. I promise you we'll be back." "You don't have to come back," Martha said. "You don't owe me anything." "Yes, we do," Jake said. "We owe you, and we owe George. And it's time we paid our debts." He knelt down beside her chair one more time. "Ma'am, can I ask you something? Do you trust me?" Martha looked into his eyes. She thought about George, about the photograph, about these 5 strangers who'd wept at her table. "Yes," she said, "I trust you." "Then trust me when I say this tomorrow morning. Things are going to be different. We're going to make sure of it." They left 10 minutes later, after Tommy had fixed the broken motorcycle with tools from George's garage tools George had carefully maintained, even knowing he'd never use them again. The sound of 5 motorcycle engines rumbled into the night, fading into the distance. Martha sat in George's chair, holding his pocket watch, and wondered what morning would bring. She fell asleep there, exhausted and emotionally drained, with no insulin in her system and no money in her purse, but with something she hadn't felt in 5 years. Hope. The November rain had stopped by the time Martha woke. Pale morning sunlight filtered through the windows. She'd slept in the chair all night, and her back ached as she pushed herself upright. The house was quiet, empty. For a moment, Martha wondered if the previous night had been a dream. 5 bikers. George's photograph. The dinner she couldn't afford to make. But no, the dishes were clean in the cabinet. The dining room table was still set with her good china. It had been real. Martha walked stiffly to the kitchen and looked out the window. Then her heart stopped. The driveway was full of motorcycles. Not 5, not 10, 200. 200 gleaming Harley-Davidson motorcycles parked in perfect rows that extended from her driveway into the street and down the entire block. And beside each motorcycle stood a person. Men and women, young and old, and all wearing leather jackets with the same patch on the back. Rolling Thunder Veterans MC. They stood in silence, heads bowed as if at a memorial service. In front of them, all hanging from 2 motorcycles, was a banner 20 feet long. It read, "Thank you, Martha, you fed 5. We came as 200. Martha's legs gave out. She caught herself on the kitchen counter, her mind unable to process what she was seeing. A knock at the door. With trembling hands, Martha walked to the front door and opened it. Jake stood on her porch, but he wasn't alone. Behind him stood Maria, Tommy, Carlos, and Ray. And behind them, filling the entire street, stood 200 bikers. "Good morning, ma'am," Jake said, and his voice carried clearly in the still morning air. "Last night you gave 5 strangers everything you had. You fed us when you had no food. You welcomed us when you had every reason to be afraid. And you did it all in honor of a man who saved my life 30 years ago. He gestured to the assembled bikers. We're a family, ma'am, rolling thunder. When one of us calls, we all answer. I called last night. I told them about you, about what you did, about George. A woman stepped forward from the crowd, older perhaps in her 70s, wearing a leather jacket decorated with military patches. I'm Sarah Mitchell, she said. My son was saved by your husband in 1991. He died in 2003, but he never forgot George Hayes. When Jake called last night and told us about you, I drove 8 hours to be here. Another man stepped forward, younger with a prosthetic leg. My father served with your husband. George pulled him out of a burning aircraft in 1989. My father died last year, but he made me promise if I ever met anyone from George's family, I was to help them however I could. One by one, people stepped forward. Some had known George. Some had heard about him. Some had never heard of him at all, but had heard about Martha. You gave your last $15 to feed strangers, one woman said. That's the kind of person the world needs. You honored the memory of a veteran, an older man said. We honor our own. Jake pulled out an envelope. Ma'am, last night we made some calls, not just to bikers, to veterans organizations, to churches, to businesses, to people who believe in kindness. He handed her the envelope. Martha opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a check, $18,400. It's enough to pay your house payment, Jake said, to buy your medication for a year, to fix your roof and your furnace and your windows, and to have something left over for yourself. Martha couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. But we're not done, Maria said, stepping forward. I called the pharmacy. We've arranged for your insulin to be covered, and I'm a nurse now at the Veterans Medical Center in Billings. You have an appointment next week. Full checkup, no charge. Tommy spoke next. Your garage, I noticed the tools in there. Your husband's tools. They're good quality, but some need replacing. We've brought new ones, top of the line. They're in the truck. Carlos, who'd barely spoken the night before, stepped forward. I'm a handyman. I've brought a crew. We're going to fix your roof today, the furnace tomorrow, the windows next week, all of it. No charge, my brow. Ray was last. He pulled out a small Bible identical to the one he'd been holding the night before. This is for you. Your faith inspired me, ma'am. It reminded me why I became a chaplain in the first place. I'd lost my way. You helped me find it again. Martha tried to speak, but no words would come. Tears streamed down her face. Why? She finally whispered. Why all this? Jake knelt down in front of her just as he had the night before. Because you remind us what we're fighting for, he said. We ride across this country raising money for hospitals and veterans and families in need. But sometimes we forget why we do it. We get tired. We get cynical. We wonder if kindness even exists anymore. He gestured to the assembled crowd. Then we met you, a woman with nothing who gave everything. Not for reward, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. You reminded us that people like you still exist. And if people like you exist, then our work matters. He stood and addressed the crowd, his voice ringing clear. This woman fed us with her last $15. She welcomed us into her home. She honored the memory of George Hayes, a man who saved my life and the lives of 3 others in a desert halfway around the world. She asked for nothing in return. She expected nothing in return. Jake turned back to Martha. But we don't leave our own behind. George was one of us, and now so are you. The 200 bikers raised their right fists to their chests in unison, a salute. Thank you, Martha Hayes, they said together, their voices carrying down the street. For your kindness, for your courage, for George. Martha collapsed into Jake's arms, sobbing. 50 years of holding strong, 5 years of grief, months of fear and desperation. It all poured out, and Jake held her, this scarred warrior who'd seen combat and death, held this elderly woman as gently as if she were made of glass. It's okay, he whispered. We've got you now. You're not alone anymore. The sun rose higher over Millbrook, Montana, and on Maple Street, 200 motorcycles stood silent witness as kindness was repaid with kindness, and a community of strangers became a family. The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the night's rain. Steam rose from 200 motorcycles parked along Maple Street like an honor guard of chrome and steel. Inside Martha's house, the small living room had become a command center. Jake spread a set of blueprints across the dining room table while Maria checked Martha's blood sugar for the 3rd time that morning. The reading was better now, stabilized by the emergency glucose tablets Maria had administered and the breakfast that had appeared as if by magic, courtesy of half a dozen bikers who'd arrived with bags of groceries. "Roof first," Jake said, pointing to the blueprints. "Carlos, you said you could have a crew up there by noon." Carlos nodded. He'd shed his quiet demeanor from the night before, transformed into a man of action. "I've got 12 people with roofing experience. We'll have the old shingles off by 3 new ones on by sunset. Weather's supposed to hold." "The furnace is shot," Tommy added, his trembling hands steadier now after a full night's sleep in Martha's garage and a hot breakfast. "I checked it this morning. It's not just broken, it's dangerous. Carbon monoxide leak waiting to happen." "Can you fix it?" Jake asked. "Not fix, replace. But I know a guy in Billings who owes me a favor. He can have a new unit here by tomorrow morning." Tommy pulled out his phone, his fingers fumbling only slightly. "I'll call him now." Martha sat in George's chair, overwhelmed. "You don't have to do all this. The money you've given me, I can hire someone." "No," Jake said firmly but gently. "The money is for you, for food, medication bills, for living. This work we do with our hands, it's what we do." "But why?" Martha asked again. "I still don't understand why you're doing all this." Maria finished packing away her medical kit and sat down on the arm of Martha's chair. "Would you like to know our stories? Really know them?" Martha nodded. "Then we'll tell you," Maria said. "All of us, because you deserve to know who we are, and why what you did last night meant everything." Jake pulled up a chair and sat across from Martha. The scarred side of his face caught the morning light. He touched it absently, a gesture so automatic he probably didn't know he was doing it. "This scar," he said. "You want to know how I got it?" "Only if you want to tell me," Martha replied. 1991, February. My F-15 took enemy fire over Iraq. We ejected, but the landing was rough. I hit my face on a rock. The blood wouldn't stop. I thought I was going to bleed out in the desert." He smiled, but it was sad. "Your husband found us. He wasn't supposed to be there. The rescue team was still 40 minutes out. But George heard the distress call, and he just went. Drove a supply truck straight into hostile territory because he knew we didn't have 40 minutes. Jake's voice grew thick. He stopped the bleeding with his own shirt. Talked to me the whole time. Told me about Montana, about you, about his son Danny. He showed me a picture of you from his wallet. You were standing in front of a Christmas tree, laughing at something." Martha remembered that picture. Christmas 1989. Danny had just told a terrible joke. "George told me my wife Martha always says that we're not defined by what happens to us, but by what we do about it. Those words kept me alive while we waited for extraction. And they've kept me alive every day since." Jake stood and walked to the window, looking out at the assembled bikers. "After the war, I came home. I had this scar. I had nightmares. I couldn't hold a jaw. I started drinking. I lost everything: my wife, my house, my self-respect." He turned back to Martha. 5 years ago, I was living on the streets in Seattle. I was going to kill myself. I had it all planned out. But the night before I was going to do it, an old man at a homeless shelter gave me a cup of coffee and sat with me. He didn't preach. He didn't judge. He just listened. And when I was done talking, he said, "Son, you're still alive. That means you still have purpose. You just haven't found it yet." Jake's eyes glistened. That man saved my life, just like George saved my life in the desert. So I decided to become that man for someone else. I started Rolling Thunder. We ride across the country helping people. Veterans, families, kids. Anyone who needs it. Because kindness saved my life twice. And I'll spend the rest of my life paying that forward. He looked directly at Martha. "Last night you gave us everything. Just like that old man gave me everything. Just like George gave me everything. You didn't know us. You were scared. But you opened your door anyway. That's who we're fighting for. That's who we're trying to be." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Maria spoke. "My turn," she said softly. Maria sat down on the floor in front of Martha, cross-legged, like a child, despite being a woman in her late 40s. "I was an Army combat medic, Iraq 2004 to 2006. I saved 47 lives. I counted them. I kept a journal with all their names." Her voice was steady, but Martha could hear the pain beneath it. "But I lost one. His name was Private First Class David Chen. No relation to me, despite the same last name. He was 19 years old. He'd been in country for 3 weeks. Maria's hands clenched. Roadside bomb. He had injuries I couldn't treat in the field. I tried. God, I tried. but he died in my arms. And the last thing he said to me was, "Tell my mom I love her." A tear rolled down Maria's cheek. I did tell her. I flew to Kansas after my deployment, and I knocked on her door, and I told her. She thanked me. She hugged me. She said I'd done everything I could, but I couldn't forgive myself. I kept thinking 47 lives saved, but the one I lost was the only one that mattered. She wiped her eyes. I came home and I couldn't go back to being a nurse. Every time I saw blood, I saw David. Every time I heard a loud noise, I hit the floor. I was broken. Maria looked up at Martha. Jake found me 3 years ago. I was working at a gas station, barely making rent-popping pills just to get through the day. He told me about Rolling Thunder. He said, "You saved 47 lives. That's 47 families that still have their sons and daughters. That's 47 reasons to keep going." He gave me purpose again. She reached up and took Martha's hand. "Last night when I ate your French toast and I started crying." "Do you know why?" Martha shook her head. "Because it tasted exactly like my grandmother's. She died when I was 12. She was the last person who made me feel safe before the war. And for just a moment, eating your food at your table, I felt safe again. You gave me that. You gave me a moment of peace." Maria stood and kissed Martha's forehead. "Thank you for that. You'll never know what it meant." Tommy was next. He stood by the fireplace, his hands shoved in his pockets to hide the tremor. He was the youngest of the group, probably early 60s, but his face was lined with worry that aged him. "I wasn't military," Tommy said. "I'm just a mechanic from Bozeman. Been fixing cars and bikes my whole life. I was good at it too. Best in the States, some people said." He pulled his hands out of his pockets. They shook like leaves in a wind. "Parkinson's disease. Diagnosed 2 years ago. Progressive, degenerative, no cure." Tommy's voice cracked. "I can barely hold a wrench anymore. The thing I was best at, the thing that defined me, I can't do it anymore. But that's not even the hard part." He pulled out his phone and showed Martha a picture. A little boy with a bright smile and a bald head. "My son Jason, 8 years old, acute lymphoblastic leukemia, stage 4. Martha's hand went to her mouth. "The doctors say he has a 20% chance," Tommy continued. 20%. Those aren't good odds. And I keep thinking I'm losing the use of my hands. My son is losing his life. What kind of God allows that?" He pocketed the phone. "Last week, Jason asked me, 'Daddy, if I die, will you forget about me?' And I had to tell my 8-year-old son that, no, I would never forget him, even though we both know he's dying and there's nothing I can do to stop it." Tommy's face crumpled. "I can't fix him. I can't fix myself. I can't fix anything anymore. I'm useless." "No," Martha said firmly. She stood up and walked to Tommy, taking his shaking hands in her steady ones. "You're not useless. You're a father who loves his son. You're a man who's fighting a disease. You're someone who, despite losing everything, still came out in the rain last night to help fix a motorcycle. That's not useless. That's heroic." Tommy broke down sobbing. Martha held him, this big man who'd lost so much, and let him cry. "Jason is going to fight," Martha said, "and you're going to fight with him. And even if the worst happens, he'll never doubt that his father loved him. That's what matters. Love doesn't end when life does." Jake quietly stepped forward and took Tommy by the shoulder. "Come on, brother. Let's get some air." They stepped outside, leaving Martha with Maria, Carlos, and Ray. Carlos spoke next, though it seemed to pain him to do so. He was a man of few words, Martha had learned, but when he spoke, it was with precision. "My wife Elena died 7 years ago." Carlos said, his accent slight but present. "Breast cancer. We found it too late. She fought for 2 years, but in the end the cancer won." He sat down heavily in a chair. "I was a private investigator, good at my job, found missing persons, solved cases, helped people. But I couldn't save my own wife. And after she died, I couldn't save my relationship with my daughter." Carlos looked at his hands. "Sophia was 16 when her mother died. She blamed me, said I worked too much, that I wasn't there for them. She was right. I was so busy finding other people that I lost my own family." His voice dropped to almost a whisper. 2 years ago, Sophia ran away, left a note saying she couldn't live with me anymore. I tried to find her. I used every skill I had, every contact, every resource. Nothing. My daughter vanished, and the man who'd found hundreds of missing people couldn't find his own child." Martha saw the pain in his eyes, deep and unhealing. "I ride with Rolling Thunder because I'm still looking," Carlos said. "Every town we stop in, I put up posters. I ask questions. I show her picture. Someone somewhere must have seen her. I can't give up. She's all I have left of Elena. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn photograph. A beautiful teenage girl with long dark hair and Elena's smile. He handed it to Martha. If you ever see her, Carlos said, her name is Sofia Mendoza. Please tell her that her father loves her and that he's sorry. Martha looked at the photograph at this child lost to grief and anger, and her heart broke. I'll pray for her every night, that she finds her way home to you. Carlos nodded, taking the photo back with trembling fingers. He didn't cry, but Martha could see the tears he was holding back. Finally, Ray spoke, the big man with the gentle voice and the Bible in his pocket. He'd been quiet through all the other stories, listening with the patience of someone used to hearing confessions. I was a Navy chaplain for 20 years, Ray said, his deep voice filling the room like an organ in a cathedral. I counseled sailors and Marines. I prayed with them before deployments. I wrote letters to their families when they didn't come home. It was my calling. I believed God had put me on this earth to bring comfort to those who serve. He pulled out the small Bible he always carried. Then my wife Sarah got sick, ovarian cancer, stage 4. I prayed harder than I'd ever prayed in my life. I truly believed that God would heal her, that my faith would be enough. Ray's voice roughened. She died on a Tuesday morning in March, holding my hand. Her last words were, "Don't lose your faith, Ray." But I did. The moment she took her last breath, I felt my faith die with her. He opened the Bible and Martha saw that the pages were filled with handwritten notes in the margins. I left the chaplaincy, left the church, couldn't even pray anymore. I was angry at God, furious. I'd spent 20 years serving him, and he took the only thing that mattered to me. Ray closed the Bible gently. I was lost for 3 years, drifting. Then Jake found me. He didn't preach. He didn't try to fix me. He just asked me to ride with him, to help people. And slowly, mile by mile, town by town, person by person, I started to feel something again. He looked at Martha. Last night when you said grace over that table, I felt the presence of God for the first time in 3 years. Not in a church, not in a prayer, but in the kindness of a woman who had nothing but gave everything. Sarah was right. Faith isn't about buildings or rituals. It's about love in action. You showed me that. Ray stood and placed his hand on Martha's shoulder. You brought me back to my calling. Not as a chaplain in a uniform, but as a minister on the road. Thank you for that gift. The morning sun streamed through the windows, now bright and warm. Outside, the sounds of work had begun. Bikers were unloading tools, organizing supplies, preparing to rebuild Martha's house piece by piece. But inside, in the quiet of the living room, 5 broken people had shared their stories with a woman who understood brokenness. Martha stood slowly. I'm just a retired school teacher from Montana, she said quietly. I'm not special. I'm not a hero. I just did what my mother taught me to do, show kindness to strangers. That's what makes you special, Jake said, having returned from outside. You don't see it as heroic. You see it as normal, as expected, as the way things should be. That's the world we're trying to build. One where kindness isn't exceptional, it's ordinary. A knock at the door interrupted them. Martha opened it to find Sheriff Tom Henderson on her porch, his weathered face creased with concern. Martha, Tom said, I heard there's a situation here. Neighbors called about motorcycles. I came to make sure everything's okay. Everything's wonderful, Tom, Martha said with a smile. These people are my guests. They're going to help fix my house. Tom looked past her at the assembled bikers, his hand resting instinctively on his service weapon. Then he saw Jake and his eyes widened. Jake Morrison, is that you? Jake stepped forward. Tom Henderson. I'll be damned. The 2 men shook hands and embraced. I haven't seen you since the reunion in Billings, Tom said. That was 5 years ago? 6, Jake replied. Tom served with me, he explained to Martha. Radio operator. Saved our asses more times than I can count. Tom's suspicion melted into understanding as Jake explained the situation. Within minutes, Tom was on his radio calling in favors, organizing the town's resources to help. Martha Hayes is a pillar of this community, Tom told Jake. She taught half the people in this town, including me. If she says you're good people, that's enough for me. He pulled out his personal wallet and extracted 5 $100 bills. For the cause. Word spread through Millbrook like wildfire. By noon, the street was packed not just with bikers, but with townspeople. Susan Miller from the Quick Mart arrived with boxes of sandwiches. Pastor David Wright from the Baptist Church brought members of his congregation checkbooks in hand. Jennifer Harris, now a successful lawyer, drove from Billings when she heard the news. Jennifer found Martha in the kitchen, overwhelmed by the chaos of kindness swirling around her. Mrs. Hayes, Jennifer said, and Martha heard the little girl who'd struggled with reading in her third-grade class. Do you remember me? Jennifer Harris, Martha said with a warm smile. Of course I remember you. You used to hate reading. Because I couldn't do it, Jennifer said. I had dyslexia, but no one knew. The other teachers wanted to hold me back a grade. But you fought for me. You stayed after school with me every day for 2 years teaching me strategies, building my confidence. You told me I wasn't stupid. My brain just worked differently. Jennifer pulled out a checkbook. I'm a lawyer now, senior partner at a firm in Billings. I make good money, and I've never forgotten who made that possible. She wrote a check and handed it to Martha. $3,000. I can't accept this, Martha protested. Yes, you can, Jennifer said firmly. You invested in me when I had nothing to give you back. Now I'm investing in you. That's how it works. Others followed, former students, neighbors, people who'd heard the story and wanted to be part of it. The pile of checks and cash on Martha's dining room table grew. By 2 in the afternoon, the total had reached $18,400. Jake counted it carefully and presented the total to Martha. Enough to pay your house debt, buy medication for a year, fix everything that needs fixing, and have money left over. Martha looked at the money, then at the faces surrounding her. 200 bikers, dozens of townspeople, all here because she'd made spaghetti for 5 strangers. I can't keep all of this, Martha said. Yes, you can. Jake started, but Martha held up her hand. You don't understand, she said. This money, it's more than I've ever had, more than I ever dreamed of having. But there are people who need it more than I do. She walked to Tommy, who was directing the roof repair crew with his shaking hands. Tommy, how much does Jason's treatment cost? Tommy's face went pale. Mrs. Hayes, you don't have to. How much the experimental treatment the doctors want to try? It's not covered by insurance. It's $50,000. Martha did the math in her head. This won't pay for all of it, but it can help. I want to donate $10,000 to St. Mary's Children's Hospital for Jason and for other children like him. Tommy's face crumpled. Ma'am, that's your house money. That's your future. No, Martha said gently. That boy is the future. You save him and he'll grow up to save others. That's how it works. That's how George would want it. Jake stepped forward, his voice thick. Martha, are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The decision made, Jake got on his phone. Within an hour, he'd contacted St. Mary's Hospital in Billings. The donation was arranged. The hospital administrator, a woman named Dr. Patricia Vance, called Martha personally. Mrs. Hayes, doctor. Vance said over speakerphone so everyone could hear, your donation is going to help not just Jason O'Brien, but 12 other children currently in treatment. We've been trying to fund this new protocol for 2 years. Your gift makes it possible. You're saving lives. Tommy was on his knees sobbing. Maria knelt beside him, holding him while he cried. But the day wasn't over yet. At 4 in the afternoon, a pickup truck pulled up and a man in his mid-40s stepped out. He was tall, well-dressed, with Martha's eyes and George's jawline. Danny. Martha's son walked up the driveway, his face a mixture of shock and confusion as he took in the scene. 200 motorcycles, dozens of people, his mother's house swarming with workers. Mom, Danny called out, what the hell is going on? Martha appeared on the porch, and for a moment, mother and son just stared at each other. 8 months since they'd spoken. 8 months of silence and pain. Danny, Martha whispered, you came. I saw it on Facebook, Danny said, his voice strained. Mrs. Larson from church posted pictures. I drove 18 hours straight from Dallas. Mom, what is all this? Jake stepped forward. You must be Danny Hayes. Your mother's an extraordinary woman. She helped us, so we're helping her. Danny looked at Jake, then at the assembled crowd, then back at his mother. Mom, are you okay? Are these people bothering you? No, sweetheart, Martha said, tears beginning to flow. They're helping me. They're saving me. Danny climbed the porch steps. Up close, Martha could see he'd been crying during the drive. His eyes were red and swollen. I'm sorry, Danny said, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry I haven't called. I'm sorry I left you alone. I was angry and hurt, and I'm sorry, Mom. No, Martha said, taking her son's face in her hands. I'm sorry. What I said about Linda, it was wrong. I was holding on to old ideas, old prejudices that I should have let go of years ago. I hurt you, and I've regretted it every single day since. Danny pulled his mother into a fierce hug. Linda and I are engaged. We're getting married in January. I wanted you there, but I didn't know how to ask after everything that happened. Martha pulled back, looking into her son's eyes. I would be honored to be there. Linda is a wonderful woman. She makes you happy. That's all I've ever wanted for you. Really, Danny's voice was small, like a child seeking approval. Really, Martha said firmly, I was wrong, and I'm asking you to forgive me. There's nothing to forgive, Danny said, hugging her again. I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart. Jake watched the reunion with tears in his own eyes. He turned to Maria Ray and Carlos. This is why we do this, right here, this moment. The afternoon wore on. The roof was completed by sunset just as Carlos had promised. Tommy's contact delivered a new furnace which was installed by 8 that evening. The windows were measured for replacement. The walls were patched and painted. As night fell, someone set up a bonfire in Martha's backyard. 200 bikers plus half the town of Millbrook gathered around it. Someone brought guitars. Someone else brought food. It became a celebration. Danny sat beside his mother, meeting each of the bikers, hearing their stories. When Jake showed him the photograph from 1991, Danny wept. I never knew, Danny said. Dad never told me he'd saved anyone. He just said he fixed planes. Your father was a humble man, Jake said. He didn't do things for recognition. He did them because they were right, like your mother. Danny looked at Martha with new eyes. You gave away $10,000 today for a child you've never met. For a child who deserves a future, Martha corrected. And for his father who saved your father's life 30 years ago. It's all connected, Danny, all of it. As the night deepened, people began to drift away. The bikers would stay one more day to finish the work, but most of the townspeople headed home, promising to return tomorrow. Jake approached Martha as she sat by the fire with Danny. Ma'am, there's one more thing. We need to discuss your medication. The money will cover it, Martha said. Not just covering it, Maria interjected. I made some calls today to the Veterans Medical Center where I work. They have a program for spouses of veterans. Georgia's military service qualifies you. We can get your insulin and all your medications covered. For free. For the rest of your life. Martha stared at her. Free. Free, Maria confirmed. And I've scheduled you for a full physical next Wednesday. I'll drive you to Billings myself. I don't know what to say, Martha whispered. You don't have to say anything, Maria replied. You've already said everything that matters. The fire burned low. Danny helped his mother inside where her house, newly repaired, newly warm, welcomed them. He helped her to bed, tucking her in like she used to tuck him in when he was a child. Mom, Danny said as he turned off the light, I'm going to stay for a few days. Is that okay? It's more than okay, Martha said. It's wonderful. And Mom, I want you to meet Linda. Really meet her. Not as someone I'm dating, but as your future daughter-in-law. Can she come up next weekend? I would love that, Martha said. I want to know her. I want to be part of your life again. Danny kissed his mother's forehead. You never stopped being part of my life. I was just too stubborn to remember that. Alone in her room, Martha held George's pocket watch and looked at his photograph on her nightstand. Did you see that, George? She whispered. Danny came home, and you saved all those people, and I never knew. You were a hero, and you never said a word. She could almost hear George's response in that quiet way he had. Wasn't about being a hero, Martha. Was just about doing the right thing. I know, Martha said to the photograph. I know. She fell asleep holding the watch with her son in the next room, in a house filled with warmth and hope for the first time in 5 years. Outside, Jake stood guard on the porch with Ray. They'd volunteered for first watch, making sure Martha was safe through the night. You think we've done enough? Jake asked. Ray opened his Bible, finding a passage by the light of his phone. Matthew 25:40. Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. He closed the book. We haven't done enough. We'll never do enough. But we've done what we could, and tomorrow we'll do it again. Jake nodded. Tomorrow and every day after. The night settled over Millbrook, Montana. On Maple Street, 200 motorcycles stood silent watch. And in the small wooden house that George built, Martha Hayes slept peacefully, surrounded by love she'd earned through nothing more than kindness. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. 3 weeks passed like pages turning in a book Martha had never expected to read. The wooden house on Maple Street transformed from a structure slowly dying to a home reborn. The new roof gleamed under the Montana sun. The furnace hummed with quiet efficiency, spreading warmth through every room. New windows kept out the December cold that had arrived early this year, turning the landscape white. But the greatest transformation was not in the structure. It was in Martha herself. She stood at her kitchen window on a Tuesday morning, the 7th of December, watching snow fall in thick, lazy flakes. Her hands were steady as she held her coffee cup. Her blood sugar was stable, regulated by the insulin that now arrived monthly from the Veterans Medical Center at no cost. The house payment had been made. The bills were paid. For the first time in 5 years, she could breathe without the weight of financial terror pressing against her chest. Danny had stayed for a week after that miraculous day in November, helping organize the house, reconnecting with his mother in ways both profound and simple. They'd talked late into the nights, clearing away years of misunderstanding with honesty and tears and forgiveness. He'd returned to Dallas with promises to call every Sunday, and he'd kept that promise. Every Sunday at 2 o'clock, Martha's phone would ring, and she'd hear her son's voice telling her about his week, about Linda, about the wedding plans. Linda herself had driven up the following weekend, nervous and hopeful. Martha had embraced her at the door, and within an hour they'd been looking through old photo albums together, Linda asking questions about George, about Danny as a child, about the life Martha had lived. When Linda left, she'd called Martha Mom for the first time, and Martha's heart had nearly burst with joy. The bikers had stayed 3 days, completing every repair, every improvement. They'd left on that third day in a thunderous parade of chrome and leather, 200 engines roaring in unison as they pulled away from Maple Street. But they'd left pieces of themselves behind. Phone numbers, email addresses, promises to return. Jake had hugged Martha before leaving, holding her like she was precious cargo. "You're family now," he'd said simply. "We'll be back." And they had kept in touch. Letters arrived weekly. Carlos sent postcards from every town they stopped, in each one featuring a new photo of his daughter Sophia with the words, "Still looking, still hoping." Tommy sent pictures of Jason undergoing treatment, the experimental protocol funded partly by Martha's donation. The boy was responding well, the doctors cautiously optimistic. Maria called every Wednesday to check on Martha's health, her nurse's training, making her unable to stop caring even from hundreds of miles away. Ray sent scripture verses handwritten on beautiful stationery, each one chosen specifically for Martha. Each one a reminder that faith lived in action, not just words. But it was Jake's letters that Martha treasured most. He wrote like George used to write, sparse and honest, every word carrying weight. He told her about the towns they visited, the people they helped, the lives they touched. And in every letter, he thanked her again for reminding him why the work mattered. This morning, as Martha watched the snow fall, she heard the familiar rumble of a motorcycle engine. She smiled. Jake had written that he'd be passing through Billings this week, and Millbrook was only 90 minutes from there. She'd suspected he'd find an excuse to visit. But when she looked out the window, she saw not one motorcycle, but 5. Jake, Maria, Tommy, Carlos, and Ray, their bikes parked in her freshly shoveled driveway, snow dusting their leather jackets. Martha opened the door before they could knock, her face bright with welcome. "I thought you were in Billings helping with that Veterans Center." "We were," Jake said, stamping snow from his boots. "But we heard something interesting. Something we thought you should know about before it happens." Martha's smile faltered. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "Nothing wrong," Maria assured her, coming inside and embracing Martha warmly. "Actually, something very right. But it's going to be unexpected, and we wanted to prepare you." They settled in the living room, and Martha made coffee, the familiar ritual calming her nerves. When everyone had a cup, Jake pulled out his phone. "3 days ago, a producer from Good Morning America called me," he said. "They want to do a story about what happened here in November. About you." Martha's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. "Good Morning America, the television show." "The very one," Ray confirmed, his deep voice gentle. "The story went viral on social media. The hashtag Martha Angel has been trending. Over 20 million views across various platforms. People want to know more about the woman who gave everything to help strangers." "But I didn't do anything special." Martha protested, the same argument she'd been making for 3 weeks. "I just made dinner." "You gave your last $15 to feed people you had every reason to fear," Carlos said quietly. It was perhaps the longest sentence Martha had heard him speak. "In a world that teaches us to protect ourselves first, you chose kindness. That's not ordinary. That's extraordinary." Tommy leaned forward, his hands trembling slightly as they held his coffee cup. "They want to fly you to New York, put you on national television. Tell your story to millions of people." The room seemed to tilt. Martha set down her cup before she dropped it. "I can't go on television. I'm just a retired school teacher from Montana. I don't know how to talk to cameras and producers and millions of people." "You know how to talk to 5 scared bikers on a rainy night," Jake said. You know how to open your door when it would be easier to lock it. You know how to give when you have nothing left to give. That's all you need to know. Martha shook her head. I'm not comfortable with this. With being in the spotlight, it feels wrong, like I'm taking credit for something that wasn't about credit. Maria moved to sit beside Martha on the couch, taking her hand. I understand, I really do. But think about what this could mean. Your story could inspire others to be kind, to help strangers, to open their doors instead of locking them. Isn't that worth being uncomfortable for an hour? Martha thought about George, about what he would say. She could almost hear his voice, that practical, no-nonsense tone he used when he was thinking through a problem. If it helps people, Martha, then the discomfort doesn't matter much, does it? What would I have to do? Martha asked quietly. Fly to New York on the 14th, Jake said. They'll put you up in a hotel. The interview is on the 15th. We'll all be there with you. You won't be alone. Danny should be there too, Martha said suddenly. And Linda, this story isn't just about me. It's about family, about what George taught me, about reconciliation. They should be part of it. Jake smiled. Already arranged. Danny and Linda will fly from Dallas. We're all going to be there. Martha took a deep breath. Then I suppose I'm going to New York. The week that followed was a blur of preparation. Danny called every day, excited and nervous. Linda sent Martha a new dress to wear on the show, a beautiful deep blue that brought out Martha's eyes. The town of Millbrook buzzed with excitement. Everyone wanted to help, to be part of Martha's journey. On the morning of December 14th, Martha stood in her bedroom, looking at herself in the mirror. She wore a simple gray traveling suit, her white hair neatly styled by Jennifer Harris, who'd insisted on driving from Billings to help. Around her neck was George's pocket watch on a chain visible against her blouse. You'd laugh at all this, wouldn't you? Martha said to George's photograph on her dresser. Your wife going on television. You always said I talk too much in front of company. The photograph didn't answer, but Martha felt a warmth in her chest that she chose to interpret as George's approval. Jake drove her to the Billings airport in his pickup truck, the motorcycles following behind like an honor guard. At the airport, Martha was surprised to find half the town of Millbrook waiting. Sheriff Henderson, Pastor Wright, Susan Miller. Former students now grown with children of their own. They'd all come to see her off. Millbrook is proud of you, Martha, Sheriff Henderson said, presenting her with a card signed by over 300 people. You show them what Montana values are all about. The flight to New York was Martha's first time on an airplane. She sat next to Jake, who held her hand during takeoff as she gripped the armrest with white knuckles. Danny and Linda were 3 rows back, having flown in from Dallas and connected with the same flight. As the plane climbed above the clouds, Martha looked out the window at the vast expanse of sky and thought about how small she was, how small Millbrook was, how small her act of kindness had seemed at the time. Yet here she was, 30,000 feet in the air, flying to New York to tell millions of people about making spaghetti for 5 strangers. The world, Martha decided, was a strange and wonderful place. New York City assaulted Martha's senses the moment she stepped out of the taxi at her hotel. The noise, the lights, the sheer number of people moving like rivers through streets of glass and steel. It was overwhelming and terrifying and exhilarating all at once. The hotel was nicer than any place Martha had ever stayed. The room had a view of Central Park, the treed bare and dusted with the snow. Danny and Linda had the room next door. The bikers were scattered across several floors, but Jake had a room on Martha's floor close enough to help if she needed anything. That evening, they all gathered in Martha's room or dinner room service, bringing enough food to feed an army. Tommy showed Martha new pictures of Jason. The boy's hair was starting to grow back, soft and fuzzy like a baby chick. His smile was bright and real. The doctors say he's in remission, Tommy said, his voice thick with emotion. The experimental treatment worked. They're calling it a miracle. Martha touched the photograph gently. Not a miracle. Science and love and a little bit of hope. Hope you helped provide, Maria reminded her. Dunno. The next morning, December 15th, Martha woke before dawn. She couldn't sleep. Nervous energy buzzing through her veins like electricity. She dressed carefully in the blue dress Linda had sent, pinned George's watch to her chest like a talisman, and tried to calm her racing heart. At 6 in the morning, a car arrived to take them to the studio. The Good Morning America building was enormous, glass and steel, reaching toward the winter sky. Inside, producers and assistants bustled around with headsets and clipboards, moving with practiced efficiency. A young woman named Rebecca Foster, the producer who'd first called Jake, greeted them warmly. Mrs. Hayes, we're so honored to have you. This is going to be a beautiful segment. Martha was led to a makeup chair, where a kind woman named Denise worked magic with brushes and powders, making Martha look like a softer, younger version of herself. In the mirror, Martha barely recognized the woman looking back. She looked elegant, dignified, not at all like a retired school teacher from Montana who'd been terrified of losing her house just a month ago. "You look beautiful, Mom," Danny said when he saw her, Linda nodding agreement beside him. The studio was smaller than Martha expected, but filled with cameras and lights that made it feel like stepping onto a stage. The host, Michael Strahan, was taller in person, his smile warm and genuine as he shook Martha's hand. "Thank you for being here, Mrs. Hayes," Michael said. "Your story touched millions of people, including me." They ran through the segment quickly, Michael explaining how the interview would flow, what questions he'd ask, where Martha should look. Then Rebecca called for places, and suddenly it was happening. The lights blazed, the cameras moved into position. Michael settled into his chair across from Martha, and she realized with a start that this was real. In moments, millions of people would be watching her. "And we're live in 5, 4, 3, the floor director counted down with his fingers, then pointed at Michael. "Welcome back to Good Morning America," Michael said, his voice smooth and professional. "This morning we have an incredible story about kindness, sacrifice, and the power of community. It started with one woman, $15, and 5 strangers on a rainy night in Montana. Please welcome Martha Hayes." The audience applauded. Martha's heart pounded so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. "Mrs. Hayes," Michael began, "you did something remarkable last month. Can you tell us what happened?" Martha took a breath and began to speak. She told the story simply the way it had happened. 5 bikers in the rain. The decision to open her door. The $15, that was all she had. The dinner that became something more. Michael listened, his eyes never leaving her face. When Martha finished, he leaned forward. "You gave everything you had. $15 was all the money you had until your next Social Security check. You were behind on your house payment. You'd run out of insulin for your diabetes. And yet you spent it all on 5 people you'd never met." Why? Martha thought about the question. She'd been asked it so many times now, but she'd never found words that felt adequate. "Because they needed help," Martha said finally, "and I had the ability to help them. It's not more complicated than that. My husband George used to say that we're not defined by what we keep, but by what we give away. I had $15. They needed food. The math was simple." "But you were scared," Michael said. "You told the producers that you were frightened when you saw 5 bikers at your door." "Of course I was scared," Martha admitted. "I'm not foolish. I'm an old woman living alone. But I was also raised to believe that fear is not an excuse for cruelty, and turning away hungry people would have been cruel." Michael nodded slowly. "The story doesn't end there, though. Jake Morrison, can you join us?" Jake walked onto the set, and the audience applauded again. He sat beside Martha, and she felt her nervousness ease with his presence. Michael showed the photograph from 1991, the one of George and Jake and the other pilots in the desert. "Martha, you didn't know that your husband had saved Jake's life 30 years ago. How did you feel when you learned that?" Martha touched George's pocket watch. "I felt proud and humbled. George never talked about his time in the military. He said he was just doing his job. But Jake told me that George drove into hostile territory under fire to save 4 men. That's not just doing a job. That's heroism. And yet he never mentioned it," Michael said. "No," Martha agreed, "because for George, heroism wasn't about recognition. It was about doing the right thing when the right thing needed to be done. He lived that way every day of his life. He just never made a fuss about it." Jake spoke, then his voice rough with emotion. "George saved my life in the desert. Martha saved it again 30 years later when I was lost and broken. The kindness she showed me, showed all of us, reminded me that people like her and George still exist, that the world isn't as dark as it sometimes seems." Michael turned to the camera. What Martha didn't know was that Jake and the Rolling Thunder Veterans MC would return the next morning with 200 bikers to help her. They raised over $18,000, repaired her house, and connected her with medical care. But that's not even the most incredible part of this story. The screen behind them lit up with a video feed. Martha gasped. It was St. Mary's Children's Hospital in Billings. And standing in front of the camera was a small boy with a bright smile and fuzzy new hair growth. "Hi, Mrs. Hayes," Jason said, waving at the camera. "I'm Jason O'Brien. My daddy is Tommy. I wanted to say thank you." Tommy appeared on screen beside his son, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Mrs. Hayes, because of your donation, Jason got the treatment he needed. The doctors say he's in remission. My son is going to live. You gave me that. You gave him a future." Martha's vision blurred with tears. She tried to speak but couldn't find words. Jason continued, his voice bright and clear. The doctors say I can go home for Christmas. I get to sleep in my own bed and play with my dog and everything. Thank you for helping me, Mrs. Hayes. You're like an angel. The video feed ended. Martha wiped her eyes with the tissue Michael handed her. The audience was silent, many wiping their own tears. That's not all, Michael said gently. We have one more surprise for you. From backstage, a man walked out. He was older, perhaps 78 or 80, with white hair and kind eyes. He moved slowly but with dignity, using a cane to steady himself. Martha's breath stopped. Frank Mitchell. Frank Mitchell smiled. Hello, Martha, or should I say, little Martha, though you're not so little anymore. Martha stood on shaking legs and Frank embraced her carefully. I don't understand, Martha whispered. How are you here? Michael gestured for them to sit. Mrs. Hayes, can you tell us who Frank Mitchell is? Martha looked at Frank, then at the camera, her mind spinning back through decades. Frank, when I was a girl, maybe 11 or 12 years old, a young man came to our farm. He was homeless, hungry, desperate. My father, Henry Hayes, could have sent him away, but instead he gave Frank a meal, then a place to sleep, then a job. Frank nodded, taking up the story. I was 17 years old and I had nothing. I'd run away from an abusive home, been living on the streets for months. I was starving, sick, ready to give up. Henry Hayes saved my life. He gave me work on his farm, taught me skills, treated me with dignity. I worked for him for 3 years, saved my money, learned everything I could. And then, Michael prompted. Then I went to trade school, Frank said, became a carpenter, started my own construction company, built it into one of the largest in the Pacific Northwest. I retired 5 years ago, a wealthy man, and I've spent those 5 years trying to find the Hayes family to thank them for what Henry did for me. He turned to Martha, his eyes bright. When I saw your story on the news, when I heard your name and saw you lived in Montana, I knew. You're Henry's daughter, the little girl who used to bring me lemonade while I worked in the fields. Martha remembered, fragments of memories, sun-bright and warm, a young man fixing fences, her father's hand on the young man's shoulder, lemonade in mason jars. You have your father's heart, Frank said. He gave when he had little. You gave when you had nothing. That's the Hayes legacy. Frank reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. He handed it to Martha with both hands, a gesture of respect and gratitude. This is a check for $50,000, Frank said. It's not payment. It's a debt I've owed for 60 years. Your father invested in me when no one else would. He saw potential in a homeless teenager and gave him a chance. That chance changed my life. Now I want to invest in you. Martha stared at the envelope, unable to process what she was hearing. But there's more, Michael said. We've been contacted by the Harley-Davidson Motor Company. They want to honor you as well. A representative from Harley-Davidson, a woman in a sharp business suit, walked onto the set. Mrs. Hayes, your story embodies the values our company was built on. Brotherhood service community. We want to sponsor Rolling Thunder Veterans MC with a $100,000 donation to continue their work. And we want to cover all your medical expenses for the next 10 years. The audience erupted in applause. Martha sat frozen, overwhelmed by the generosity pouring over her like a flood. When the applause died down, Michael spoke directly to the camera. If you've been moved by Martha's story, Rolling Thunder Veterans MC accepts donations to help veterans and families in need. The information is on our website. And maybe, just maybe, Martha's kindness can inspire us all to open our doors a little wider, to give a little more freely, to remember that we're all connected in this beautiful, broken world. He turned back to Martha. Mrs. Hayes, what will you do with Frank's gift? Martha looked at the envelope in her hands. $50,000, more money than she'd earned in years of teaching, more than she'd ever dreamed of having. She thought about George, about her father, about the legacy of kindness that had been passed down through generations. I'll keep $20,000, Martha said slowly. That's more than enough for me to live comfortably, to not worry about bills or medicine or repairs. The rest, $30,000, I want to establish a fund, the George Hayes Memorial Fund. It will provide assistance to families of veterans who are struggling, help with medical bills, housing, education for their children. George spent his life serving others. This way his name will continue that service. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Martha looked at Danny and Linda in the front row, both crying. She looked at Jake, Maria, Tommy Carlos, and Ray, standing at the side of the set, these 5 strangers who'd become family. She looked at Frank Mitchell, this ghost from her childhood, who'd returned to complete a circle 60 years in the making. And she felt George's presence warm and approving, as real as if he were sitting beside her. The interview concluded. The cameras stopped rolling, but the moment wasn't over. Michael Strahan stood and embraced Martha, something he apparently rarely did on camera. "Thank you," he whispered. "You reminded me why I do this job. To find people like you and share their light with the world." Backstage, Martha was swarmed by producers and crew members, all wanting to shake her hand to tell her how her story had moved them. Rebecca Foster hugged her tightly. "You're going to change lives, Mrs. Hayes," Rebecca said. "This segment is going to be shared millions of times. Your kindness is going to ripple out farther than you can imagine." Danny and Linda found her in the chaos, and they held each other, the three of them a family reunited and stronger for the trials they'd weathered. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," Danny said. "Dad would be too." "Dad is," Martha replied. "I can feel it." That evening, they all gathered at a restaurant near the hotel, a celebration that felt both surreal and perfect. Frank Mitchell joined them, sharing stories about Henry Hayes that Martha had never heard, painting a picture of her father as a young man strong and kind and certain in his values. "Your father told me something I've never forgotten," Frank said as the meal wound down. "He said son wealth isn't counted in dollars. It's counted in the lives you touch and the good you do. I've made millions of dollars in my life, Martha. But the wealth your father gave me was worth more than all of it." Carlos, who rarely spoke, raised his glass. To Henry Hayes and George Hayes, men who understood that true legacy isn't what you leave behind, but what you pass forward. They all drank to that. Later, as Martha prepared for bed in her hotel room, she stood at the window looking out at the glittering lights of New York City. Somewhere in this vast metropolis, people were watching this segment, sharing it, talking about it. Her story, the story of a quiet moment of kindness on a rainy Montana night, was spreading across the world. It was too big, too much. Martha felt small and inadequate in the face of it all. Her phone rang. She answered to hear a voice she didn't recognize. "Mrs. Hayes, my name is Patricia Chen. I'm Maria Chen's mother. I wanted to call and tell you that my daughter hasn't been the same since she met you. She's been struggling since the war, hurting in ways I couldn't reach. But something changed after that night in your home. She's healing, Mrs. Hayes. You helped my daughter heal. I needed you to know that." Martha listened as Patricia cried and thanked her, and she realized something profound. The ripples of kindness didn't just spread outward. They spread in all directions, touching lives in ways you could never predict or measure. When the call ended, Martha sat on the edge of the bed and opened her laptop, something Danny had taught her to use. She searched for the Good Morning America segment and found it already posted online. 3 million views in 6 hours. The comments section was flooded with messages. "This made me cry. I'm going to be kinder tomorrow. I've been so angry at the world. This reminded me that good people still exist. My father was a veteran. He would have loved this story. Thank you for honoring our service members. I'm a single mom struggling to pay bills. This gave me hope that kindness still matters." On and on, thousands of comments, each one a small light in the darkness. Martha closed the laptop and picked up her phone. She called Danny. "Mom, everything okay?" "Everything's perfect, sweetheart. I just wanted to hear your voice and to tell you I love you." "I love you too, Mom. Danny, I want you and Linda to come to Montana for Christmas. I want to cook dinner in my warm house with my new furnace and my fixed roof. I want to start new traditions. Will you come? We wouldn't miss it for the world." Martha hung up and lay down in the impossibly soft hotel bed, George's pocket watch on the nightstand beside her, ticking away the seconds of a life that had become unexpectedly extraordinary. 6 months later, on a warm June morning, Martha sat in the sidecar of Jake Morrison's Harley-Davidson, wearing a leather jacket that Maria had given her and a helmet that made her laugh every time she put it on. They were somewhere on Highway 1 in California, the Pacific Ocean glittering to their left, 200 motorcycles rumbling ahead, and behind them in perfect formation, Rolling Thunder's summer charity ride. Seattle to San Diego, raising money for children's hospitals along the way, and Martha had been invited to join them. At first she'd said no. She was 74 years old. She'd never ridden a motorcycle. It was too much, too dangerous, too far outside her comfort zone. But Danny had encouraged her. Linda had helped her pack. And when Jake had shown up at her door in May with the modified sidecar specifically designed for comfort and safety, Martha had found herself saying yes. They'd been on the road for 2 weeks now, and Martha had never felt more alive. They stopped at children's hospitals, where Martha met families struggling with medical bills, with sick children, with fear and exhaustion. She talked to them, held their hands, shared her story, and watched as hope bloomed in their tired eyes. They stopped at veteran centers where old soldiers with haunted eyes found comfort in the presence of these bikers who understood their struggles. Martha served coffee and listened to stories and learned that healing took many forms. They stopped in small towns where people lined the streets to watch the motorcycles pass and children waved American flags, and for a moment everyone felt connected to something larger than themselves. Martha kept a journal, writing in it each night before bed. She wrote about the people she met, the places she saw, the feeling of wind in her face as they rode along highways that seemed to stretch forever. She wrote about Jason, who was now cancer-free and growing stronger every day. Tommy sent pictures weekly, this little boy reclaiming his childhood one day at a time. She wrote about Sofia Mendoza, who Carlos had finally found. The girl had been in Denver working at a coffee shop, trying to build a new life away from the pain of her mother's death. When Carlos walked into that coffee shop, when father and daughter saw each other for the first time in 2 years, they'd both wept. Sophia was coming home. Slowly, carefully, but coming home. She wrote about Maria, who'd returned to nursing full-time, working with wounded veterans, using her trauma to help others heal from theirs. She wrote about Ray, who'd opened a mobile ministry traveling with Rolling Thunder and providing spiritual counseling to anyone who needed it. He'd found his calling again, not in a building, but on the road. And she wrote about Jake, this scarred warrior who'd become like a son to her, who checked on her constantly, who rode beside her with a protective vigilance that reminded her of George. The George Hayes Memorial Fund had grown beyond anything Martha had imagined. With the initial $30,000 in additional donations inspired by her television appearance, the fund had helped over 500 families in 6 months. Medical bills paid, rent covered, groceries provided, education funded. Small acts of kindness multiplying outward like ripples in a pond. On the final day of the ride, as they approached San Diego, Martha asked Jake to pull over at a scenic overlook. The whole convoy stopped, 200 engines falling silent as everyone gathered. Martha stood at the edge of the cliff, looking out at the Pacific Ocean, this vast body of water that seemed to stretch to infinity. Behind her stood 200 people who'd started as strangers and become family. "I want to say something," Martha announced, her voice surprisingly strong. The crowd quieted. "6 months ago, I was a lonely old woman about to lose her house. I was out of medicine, out of money, out of hope. I thought my life was over, that I was just waiting to join George." She turned to face them all. "Then 5 people knocked on my door in the rain, and everything changed. Not because of what you gave me, though, that was more than I could have dreamed, but because you reminded me that connection matters, that community matters, that we're all carrying stories and struggles and pain, and the only way through it is together." Martha pulled George's pocket watch from her jacket. "My husband carried this watch for 40 years. He was a quiet man who did extraordinary things and never asked for recognition. He saved lives in a war and never mentioned it. He built a home with his own hands and never bragged about it. He loved his family fiercely and showed it through actions, not words." She held the watch up so everyone could see it. "This watch reminds me that every moment matters. Every choice to be kind or cruel, to open our door or lock it, to give or to hoard, those choices ripple out in ways we can't predict. George knew that. My father knew that. And now I know it too." Martha looked at each of the 5 bikers who'd started this journey. "You came to my door hungry and cold. I fed you. That should have been the end of the story. Instead, it was just the beginning. You brought 200 people to help me. Those people inspired millions through television and social media. Those millions have donated to Rolling Thunder, to the George Hayes Memorial Fund, to countless other charities. They've performed their own acts of kindness, inspired by a story about spaghetti and French toast on a rainy Montana night." She laughed, and there were tears in her eyes. "I gave $15.47. That was all I had, but somehow impossibly it was enough. It's always enough when we give with an open heart." The crowd was silent, many crying openly. "So thank you," Martha said. "Thank you for knocking on my door. Thank you for seeing me not as a charity case, but as family. Thank you for giving me purpose again, for showing me that my life isn't over, it's just entering a new chapter. And thank you for teaching me that family isn't just blood. It's the people who show up when you need them, who stay when things are hard, who love you not in spite of your brokenness, but because of it." Jake stepped forward and embraced Martha, then Maria, then Tommy, Carlos, and Ray. Soon the entire group was gathered around her, 200 people united in a moment of perfect understanding. That evening, they held a celebration on the beach in San Diego. A bonfire blazed as the sun set over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Someone had brought guitars. Someone else had brought food. It became a party that lasted late into the night. Martha sat in a beach chair wrapped in a blanket, watching the fire and listening to the laughter and music around her. Danny and Linda had flown in to meet her at the end of the ride, and they sat on either side of her, her son, and her daughter-in-law, her family. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" Danny asked. Martha smiled. "I'm thinking that George would have loved this, all of it. The ride, the people, the purpose. He would have been in his element." "He is here," Linda said softly, "in every person you've helped, in every act of kindness inspired by your story. Legacy isn't what we leave when we die. It's what we create while we live." Martha nodded, feeling the truth of those words settle into her bones. Later, as the party wound down and people drifted toward their tents and hotel rooms, Martha walked to the edge of the ocean. The waves rolled in constant and eternal, and she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a small house in Montana to a beach in California. From desperation to hope. From loneliness to family. From believing her life was ending to discovering it was just beginning. She pulled out George's pocket watch and opened it. The photograph inside was one she'd placed there recently. Not of George, though she'd never forget his face, but of all of them together. Martha, Jake, Maria, Tommy, Carlos, Ray, Danny, Linda. Family. "We did good, George," Martha whispered to the ocean, to the stars, to the husband who'd taught her that kindness was the only currency that truly mattered. "We did real good." The waves answered with their ancient rhythm, and Martha stood there until the fire died down and the stars filled the sky, feeling more at peace than she had in 5 years. 1 year later, on a cold November morning that felt like an echo of the night that changed everything, Martha stood in the town square of Millbrook, Montana. The entire town had gathered along with members of Rolling Thunder from across the country for the dedication of a memorial. The statue was simple but beautiful. A woman extending her hand, and in that hand a loaf of bread. The sculptor had captured something essential in the bronze face, a kindness that transcended age or circumstance. The plaque read, "Martha Hayes, the Angel of Millbrook. Kindness doesn't cost money, but it's worth more than gold." Dedicated by the community of Millbrook and Rolling Thunder veterans, MC. Sheriff Henderson gave a speech. Pastor Wright said a prayer. Jake Morrison spoke about the night they met Martha and how it had changed not just his life, but hundreds of lives across the country. But Martha wasn't there to see it. She'd insisted on that. The statue was beautiful, the gesture overwhelming, but Martha had learned that the work was more important than the recognition. Instead, on that cold November morning, Martha was in Chicago visiting a children's hospital with Rolling Thunder. She was holding the hand of a scared little girl undergoing chemotherapy, telling her about a boy named Jason who'd been in her same position and was now healthy and strong. "You're going to make it," Martha told the girl. "You're going to fight and you're going to win. And someday you're going to help someone else the way I'm trying to help you." The girl smiled weakly, and Martha saw hope flicker in her eyes. That evening, Martha video called Danny from her hotel room. Linda answered, and Martha could see her very pregnant belly. "How's my granddaughter doing?" Martha asked. "Kicking like crazy." Linda laughed. "I think she's going to be a soccer player." "Or a biker," Danny added, appearing in the frame. They'd asked Martha what they should name the baby. Martha had suggested Eleanor after her mother. But Danny and Linda had other ideas. "We're going to call her Georgia," Linda said, "after Grandpa George. We want her to grow up knowing about the man who taught you to be kind and about the woman who taught the world the same lesson." Martha's eyes filled with tears. George would have loved that. After the call ended, Martha sat on the hotel bed and looked at the journal she'd been keeping for the past year. Hundreds of pages filled with stories. People helped. Lives changed. Kindness multiplied. She thought about the viral video that had started it all, still being shared, still inspiring people. She thought about the George Hayes Memorial Fund, which had now helped over 2,000 families. She thought about Rolling Thunder growing stronger and reaching further every year. But mostly she thought about a rainy night in November when 5 strangers knocked on her door and she made the choice to open it. That single choice had created a cascade of consequences she never could have predicted. But wasn't that always the way? You never knew which small act of kindness would be the one that changed everything. Martha pulled out George's pocket watch one last time, opening it to look at the family photograph inside. So many faces now. So much love. "We're just getting started," Martha said to the photograph, to George, to the universe that had given her this unexpected gift of purpose in her twilight years. "There's so much more work to do." She closed the watch, set it on the nightstand, and began planning tomorrow's hospital visit. Outside, snow began to fall on Chicago, just as it had fallen on Millbrook 1 year ago. But inside, Martha Hayes smiled, knowing that somewhere someone was making the choice to be kind, inspired by a story about spaghetti, five strangers, and $15 that changed the world. The end was really just another beginning. And kindness, Martha had learned, never truly ended. It just kept going, rippling outward, touching lives in ways both seen and unseen, forever and ever. Amen.